All right, so today we're going to talk about the states of consciousness. So I'm going to discuss what it means to be conscious, and we're going to talk about a couple of different levels of consciousness. But first things first, what is consciousness? What you need to understand is that consciousness is a person's awareness of everything that is going on around them or her at a given moment, which is used to organize your behavior. How do we observe it? How do we measure it? There's various different ways that you can measure and evaluate consciousness. It deals with how alert you are, people being awake. Their thoughts and feelings and sensations are kind of clear when they're in waking consciousness, which is a term you might want to jot down. Waking consciousness is a state in which thoughts, feelings, and sensations are clear, organized, and the person feels alert. When we talk about, an altered state of consciousness is in which there is a shift in the quality or pattern of mental activity as compared to waking consciousness. When you're in class and you're listening to me lecture and we're writing notes and we're discussing and things like that, that is waking consciousness. But you know how we discussed how there are different conscious levels, like your unconscious mind or your subconscious. Those areas are where you may not be as awake or alert, but that you can still take in and process information. Now, the basics of consciousness. One thing that you need to understand is that an altered state of consciousness, like I said before, is a state where there's a shift in the quality or pattern of mental activity. So in your notes right now, I want you to make sure you've captured that definition, but I'd also like for you to think of a couple of examples that could potentially be an altered state of consciousness. I'll give you an example. If someone is, I'll give you one and then you can think of a couple other ones. If someone is using a drug, a psychoactive drug, that could cause the person to be in an altered state of consciousness where they may not be in waking consciousness and they are not completely alert or even aware of all their actions or thoughts. Now, there are 4 conscious levels that we'll talk about. The conscious level that, your waking conscious is going to be, your perceptions, your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. Your pre-conscious level will be memories and stored knowledge, and your unconscious level will be fears, selfish needs, violent motives. So I want you to think, when you write that down, next to that you need to write Freud, because you remember that when we talk about the psychoanalytic perspective, that Freud believed that fears, selfish needs, and violent motives came out in our unconscious, and it seeped into our conscious mind and came out into our actions. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. The next thing you need to write down is your non-conscious level, which is biological growth. Okay? You do not tell your hair to grow. You do not tell your nails to grow. You do not tell your body to process food, or even when you're sleeping, which we'll talk extensively about sleep. Sleep helps your body recuperate. You do not tell your body to do that. That is on the non-conscious level, where it's kind of like those automatic biological processes that occur with your body. Now, we're going to talk about sleep. Hopefully you enjoy these pictures. Aren't they cute? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about sleep. The first thing that you need to understand about sleep is that we're going to discuss biological rhythms, okay? And so when we talk about the rhythms or biological rhythms, you need to know that there are rhythms of life. And the first one is going to be the circadian rhythm. The sleep cycle, the sleep-wake cycle, is the circadian rhythm. What you need to understand is that most people, experience several hours of sleep at least once during a 24-hour period, okay? And the sleep and wake cycle is ultimately controlled by the brain. And the specific area dealing with this is, do you remember? I'll give you a second to guess in your brain. It's the hypothalamus. Very good. So it's the tiny section of the brain, and you remember the hypothalamus deals with thirst and eating as well. So when we discuss the circadian rhythm, what you need to understand is that, first of all, the circadian rhythm is a life rhythm. There are a couple other biological rhythms that occur. Menstrual cycles are an example of another biological rhythm. It's something that is natural that occurs. Using the restroom, biological rhythm. All of you get hungry at a certain time of day because your biological rhythm is set to be hungry, whether you have A, B, C, or D lunch. you know your body at a certain time every day probably needs to go to the restroom. Sleep, you have hopefully, and you may not because teenagers don't get as much sleep as they should, you hopefully have a period of time that you know when it's time to go to sleep. And so your circadian rhythm, as well as menstrual cycles, sleep cycles, eating cycles, and restroom cycles, all of those things are biological rhythms. Now, a couple of things. When we talk about circadian rhythms, first of all, the circadian rhythm is a 24-hour span, but what happens is it is regulated by light, and what I mean by light is I mean daylight. So when we discuss light and how light dictates for us our sleeping patterns, you have to understand that light is going to hit retinal proteins in the eye, like the retina. Proteins pass a message to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Okay, this is a lot of words, but what you need to understand is that the suprachiasmatic nucleus in our brain is pretty much an internal clock that tells people when to wake up and when to fall asleep. So it's like wake up or go night-night, okay? Your pineal gland has melatonin in it, and melatonin is a hormone that is secreted that helps and allows a person to feel sleepy. Okay, and so melatonin, sometimes people have to take supplements of melatonin, but it's naturally created in your body. And as the light decreases, the melatonin production increases and makes you more sleepy. So I'll give you an example. We had the time change, we fell back, right, an hour, and so our nights would get darker way sooner, like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and all of us are sleepy, lethargic, tired, because there's no more access to as much sunlight. Now we have sprung forward and we have more light later in the evening, and that's allowing people to be more active, more awake, more alert, getting their work done. And so I just want you to think about how the melatonin is released when there's a lack of light, and it's because you're not being stimulated by light. So when we talk about the rhythm of life, you can take a look at this chart for a second. Midnight, deepest sleep, lowest body temperature, melatonin secretion stops. So this is just a sample of a circadian rhythm. I just want you to think of a circadian rhythm like a 24-hour clock. You might want to jot that down in your notes. So when we discuss melatonin, like I told you, melatonin is a hormone that is secreted by the pineal gland. It allows the body to feel sleepy. It causes us to go to sleep. And so people who have insomnia or sleep disorders, sometimes they get melatonin. You get it at the drugstore to take and help enable the sleep process, because some people struggle even when there is a lack of light. Remember that melatonin is released at a higher volume when there is a lack of sun. So other factors that can affect sleep are going to be time zones, the temperature. When it is colder in a room, children, when I'm teaching, are more likely to be sleepy because the cold wants us to curl up in a ball and maintain our warmth and to rest and to sleep, because your body fights harder to stay warm, so it needs to rest. And then melatonin if you have insomnia or things like that. Also, basic info about the sleep cycle. I will pick up with that with the next video.